Hello and welcome to another episode of EnVisioneering Exchange, the podcast where industry leaders discuss the most important topics in sustainability, climate change, buildings, and urban efficiency. I'm Vic Marinich with Danfoss, and I'm delighted to be the host of this podcast. You can subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Captivate, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're excited to kick off our sixth season of the EnVisioneering Exchange podcast with a discussion of oil-free and magnetic bearing compression technology. Today we have Rogerio Federici, the new president of Danfoss Turbocor, here to share his thoughts on the disruptive technology that changed the HVAC industry as we celebrate Turbocor's 30th anniversary. Rogerio, thanks for taking the time to join the show.
Thanks, Vic, for having me.
So maybe to start, can you give our listeners a little bit of a background about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm originally from Brazil, but I have been all over the place. I'm married, 2 daughters, lived in 7 different countries, but always working for Danfoss. Basically, since I was a trainee back in Brazil when I was 18 years old. So most of my colleagues, they don't know my background, but it's actually in finance. But over the last 15 years, I was working closely with customers, either on sales position or heading some of the Danfoss business. So prior to join Turbocor, I was based in Spain, heading one of our other business called condensed units globally. And by September 2022, I moved to Tallahassee, Florida, to take the role of sales and marketing for Turbocor, and more recently succeeding Ricardo Schneider as the president of Turbocor.
Congratulations on the new role as president of Danfoss Turbocor and on Danfoss Turbocor's 30th anniversary. So that's a pretty significant milestone. Can you give us a little bit of a background on how was the company founded? Where did the idea come from for both oil-free and magnetic bearings?
Yeah, this is a very interesting story. Danfoss Turbocor is basically the pioneer in oil-free centrifugal compressor technology for HVAC applications. And today we have the largest global installed base with over 150,000 oil-free compressors all over the world. The story of Turbocor begins actually in Melbourne, Australia, when an international group of designers and engineers came together from outside the industry to develop the most efficient compressor ever built and eliminated the need for oil in the system. When the team came together, they set several specifications for the compressor. So this compressor has to be a variable speed, direct drive, fully integrated electronics, no oil for sure, the size of a matchbox, cost $1, and be 100% efficient. So of course, not everything has been, we haven't been successful for everything. And the prevalent thought at that time was to adopt advancements made in the aerospace industry with frictionless magnetic bearing technology to increase the compressor efficiency. They had to develop their own engineering tools from scratch on that time. We still have actually downstairs, we still have the very first prototype compressor on our display at the front lobby. And it's actually very cool to see the evolution of the technology. But when you see the prototype and you see the technology that we have today, they are very similar. So the whole idea, the whole concept is still there. Funding on that time was very limited. So the company made the strategic decision to move to Montreal in Canada to be closer to the American market mainly and continue the development. At that time, US was by far the largest killer market in the world. So after forming a joint venture with Danfoss in 2004, Danfoss Turbocor relocated to Tallahassee, Florida in 2007. So everybody asked, why Tallahassee? This area is and was in that time considered the magnetic research capital of the world, right? Which includes several research institutions, 3 local universities, and of course a national high magnetic field lab. So this is actually the biggest, largest mag lab in the world. So this mag lab back in the 90s was on MIT, if I'm not mistaken, and moved to Florida State University. And then back in 2013, Danfoss wholly acquired Turbocor and has made us significant growth with the addition of the manufacturing locations in US. So we expand our factory recently. Then we have the manufacturing in China, which we started by 2017. And we have started in Europe, specifically in Denmark, what we call the configuration center, which is supporting the local customers in Europe to have a much better service level. And in the future, we are planning to have our own factory in Denmark, considering the significant growth that we are facing over the years.
I think it's interesting because we're talking about the 30th anniversary, and you mentioned stuff now like variable speed drives and variable speed compression and all that stuff. And today people can say, yeah, sure. I mean, right, there's residential units with variable speed compressors and stuff. But 30 years ago, I mean, you think back 30 years to be developing just a compressor with variable speed was considered the top of the top of the top of the line and super complex and all those things, and to kind of make it at mainstay, right? I mean, today it's easy to say, sure, variable speed, right? But 30 years ago, that was really a big innovation, right? Back in the mid 90s, right?
Yeah. Not only that, but combine that with an oil-free technology was completely, it was impossible on that time. Nobody believed it on the technology. And I think that was one of the big success for Turbocor was not only do that by ourselves in terms of technology, but have the right partners that believe in on the technology. Because we can have fantastic ideas, but if we cannot make this on the right way together with our customers and make this in the best commercial way, then it's just ideas. The execution part of that is critical.
Yeah. So maybe let's just take a minute to get a bit more into the details on the technical side. So exactly how does a magnetic bearing work? And how does it allow a compressor to operate oil-free? And then what are the benefits we have?
Yeah, we are talking about the lab, right? The magnetic lab. So what is the logic behind? The oil-free magnetic bearing compressor use basically magnetic levitation to suspend the compressor shaft, eliminating the need for, let's say, the traditional oil lubricated bearings, right? So we have a lot of key components, but I think there are three main important ones. First of all, it is the magnetic bearing itself. So we create the frictionless environment by levitating the shaft. Just to give an idea, we have sensors on the bearings that are measuring the position of the shaft 8,000 times a second with about 100 microns of clearance. Depending on the compressor, high lift compressor, for instance, we can actually run the shaft at 39,000 RPM. This is where, let's say, the whole beauty of the compressor is based on. Of course, a variable speed drive, as you said, so it's adjusting the motor speed to match the cooling demands, optimizing energy. And the turbocore compressor has the drive electronics integrated in the compressor that gives a very compact footprint. And of course, it's a centrifugal compressor. So it does deliver the high efficiency at partial and the full load. So there are a lot of benefits on this. So it's very, whatever I said is fantastic, but what are the benefits behind? First of all, is the energy efficiency. So you are reducing the friction and that improves the efficiency. So often we are achieving between 30 to 50% energy saving compared to the traditional systems. So oil-free compressor has no performance degradation that are seen on the oil system. So oil system, you may typically see between 10 to 20% performance loss over the years. This is not presented in turbocore compressors. So sometimes when people is comparing the technologies between an oil and an oil-free compressor, we just take the picture when the compressor is brand new or the system is brand new. But it was interesting to see that the turbocore compressor over the years, it keeps exactly the same efficiency. We had a couple of cases, actually a little bit more than a couple, compressors that we have actually recovered from the market after 18 years. And we tested on the lab, and we have done that over the last 2 years. We tested on the lab, and the efficiency that we are getting from this compressor is exactly the efficiency that we are getting when this compressor was first built. So in areas, for instance, where energy usage is intensive, data center is a very good example of that. This can generate a very quick payback, sometimes less than 2 years in comparison with typical let's say, fixed speed screw compressors. And of course, the maintenance, if you're not degrading, right? So the maintenance, no oil means fewer moving parts, less wear, cutting the downtime, and of course, maintenance costs. So if you think on the turbocore, you need to maintenance once every 5 years to change, let's say the fan motor that we have for the electronics, same one that we have on our computer, right, on our PC, and every 10 years you need to change the capacitors. But that's it. Of course, we have the environmental impact, no leakage, no contamination, and it supports, of course, all the low GWP refrigerants, and pretty much you can enables you to do much more for with less, right? And it's very as we have no friction, it's a quieter operation. So there is an absence of a mechanical contact and vibration, which results, of course, in quieter performance.
You really covered a whole lot of ground there for the oil free, for the noise, reduced service, and so on. So you probably had a lot of skeptics up front, right? When you're used to dealing with a unit that you had to service, whatever, twice a year maybe, and change oil filters and do that stuff. And now you say, no, plug it in and then come back in 5 years. Probably had a lot of training. How else did you see this disruption hitting the HVAC industry, and how did you kind of work with the industry to make sure that that was overcome and people didn't think it was maybe more marketing than real life stuff?
Yeah, that's actually a good question because at that time, there are very few believers on the technology, on the oil free. I mean, all the competitors, large companies, they said, no, thank you, right? They thought it was too complicated, too expensive, it wouldn't work. And of course, this product was very much ahead of its time, right? In the early 2000s, Danfoss took a key interest in the technology. That's where the acquisition, the joint venture, and that acquisition came from, right? And of course, being a privately held company, Danfoss was able to take a long-term strategic investment to develop the execution of the technology, to complement the innovative mindset of the Turbocor startup, and has been instrumental in the growth of the company, right? But at HVAC, we know it's a very traditional industry. It's very complicated to bring new things. It was very slow to adopt change. But with the help of our, what we call it, early adopters, we have been able to implement the technology globally and pretty much change the industry forever. Now, what we can see is that customers are requiring oil-free compressor technology in order to have the best efficiency and, of course, decarbonize their operations. I think when we talk about disruption, I think we are addressing some very important topics on the industry. And some of them was, I would say, a limitation on the conventional compressor. Of course, efficiency leap, that's clear, right? Traditional system rely heavily on oil lubrication. So there is a lot of inefficiency there. So magnetic bearing was tackling that, eliminating this constraint. We have the sustainability, of course, and this was also a big disruption on this. So you are seeing environmental regulations and increasing demand for greener technologies. And this was positioning turbocore compressor as a game changer because of the low GWP at the beginning, but a very important thing, which is the lower carbon footprint, right, on our compressor compared to a same capacity screw compressor. And of course, there was all the market differentiation. So you are reducing in general the total cost of ownership. The compressor provide a, let's call it, compelling value proposition for both commercial and industrial application. So the shift from oil to oil-free systems set a new benchmark. And it's good because we are seeing that this has inspired others. We are not the only ones. We were the first ones. But when we see competition coming, we actually embrace that because it is showing to the market that oil-free is the future. We are the market leaders and we're going to continue pushing on this direction. But it's very, very important that the market globally is not relying only on Turbocore on oil free, right? We are seeing more and more competition. As I said, we embrace that. And it is showing to the market that this is the future.
You mentioned early on, right, that Turbocor were bringing new things to the market. And of course, oil-free was just a quantum leap from where the market was 30 years ago. But I think one of the hallmarks since Danfoss has acquired Turbocor is that we've continued to innovate, continued to bring new things to the market, continued to stay on top of the industry. So can you maybe give some examples of some recent innovations and how we continue to build upon that original technology?
I think the first one, the great innovation from Turbocor was to bring centrifugal technology where nobody else was even considering possible. Not only in terms of efficiency, but also in terms of what we call it lift, the pressure ratio. Some years ago, it was considered impossible to have a centrifugal compressor to be applied on air-cooled chillers. However, currently, we are selling more turbocore compressor to air-cooled systems than water-cooled systems. But one point, and I want to go back to what I said before, turbocore will never be so innovative without our customers. They were the ones who believed on the technology since the beginning. We don't usually call them customers, we call them partners on this oil free journey. And without them, we'll never succeed. This was a big part of our success. So, when we talk about recent innovative products, recently we have launched our TG380, which today is the most efficient compressor we have ever produced. This compressor has been adopted by most of the hyperscales company on their data centers as the standard technology towards the best PUE on the market, which is the efficiency levels. This technology brings, I would say, the best of efficiency in the industry, following what we have done previously with the TG490, which we have launched 4 or 5 years ago. We are close to launch what we call it our active cooling portfolio, which will enable us to, let's say, tackle much higher addressable market right now at heat pump application. So heat pump decarbonization is a clear trend and will become a huge business in the future. And we believe Turbocore will be the perfect partner to support the industry to decarbonize their system and thus help customers to speed up the transition with a very fast payback. But coming back to the beginning of your question, the regional technologies is still there, but our team is constantly improving the compressor, such as, for instance, aerodynamics to reach levels of efficiency that some years ago, again, were considered impossible.
Yeah, you touched a bit on some topics like decarbonization and so on, and we're just seeing all kinds of changes these days in the HVACR industry, right? We're seeing the refrigerant transition coming. We're seeing a push towards decarbonization across all the different scopes. We're seeing an increase in regulations, especially around carbon emissions, and all kinds of changes coming into our industry. And globally, I think, right, we're seeing all those trends in general, but at different speeds in different regions. So how do you see the industry responding to those kinds of challenges, and what kind of trends are you seeing that are going to impact the compressor as we move forward through these changes?
It is always about combining energy efficiency, low GWP, safety, and affordability. At Danfoss Turbocor, we are, of course, committed to solving this equation in the best viable way. However, a balance of those factors cannot be found in just one refrigerant for all applications. So you're never going to find a one fits all. Just as a simple example, right? Most of the low GWP refrigerants are flammable. So then safety plays a very, very important role in that. As a compressor technology, we need to be ready to offer customers options to fit their needs. In some regions, countries, legislations are more demanding on GWP reductions, while others are more concerned on safety and affordability. But clearly, efficiency plays a very important role worldwide, mainly when we talk about affordability and payback, because at the end, if you want to move the industry, you have regulations here and there, but at the end, you need to make sure that this is logical and you have common sense in terms of application. So efficiency is the best way for us to make sure that we are offering the best solutions for our customers. Is the key to decarbonize the HVAC industry, and that's our focus at Turbocor. So we want to be a kind of a single stop shop for customers and provide a full range of a highly efficient compressor to cover their needs, the right refrigerant for each application. But it's not only refrigerant. When we talk about decarbonization, ESG plays a very important role on that. We are also working towards, for instance, increasing the circularity of our products by reducing their carbon footprint through the full product life cycle, as well, of course, as working on improving packaging material. This is something sometimes that we don't put a lot of focus, using less material and make it returnable. Those topics are quite important for us. It's not only about refrigerant, but the key message from us is we're going to have the right refrigerants to cover customer needs. If they're going left or right, it is important for us to be ready and showing the best fit for each specific application and make sure that this is affordable, but it's delivering best efficiency. That's the best way to work on decarbonization.
Right. And if I put on my Danfoss hat there for a minute, right? I mean, Danfoss offers scroll compressors. We have semi-hermetic compressors, not to mention various heat exchangers, valves, controls, and so on, because just as there's not one refrigerant that's going to solve everybody's problem everywhere, there's not one compression technology or valve technology that solves everything everywhere. So I think it's very good that we have Turbocor kind of in this Danfoss portfolio, because you don't have to try to be everything to everybody. You can be the best, right, at where Turbocor fits best, and then whatever, we let scroll compressors be best where they are, and so on. So I think that's a really good fit. So, when I think back on Turbocor, I haven't been around for 30 years, but scarily getting closer to that number. If I look at the first leader that we had when we had the joint venture with Turbocor, he was very mechanical focused, right? And I think that was the direction, right? It was a new product. We needed to get the compression technology right and get the mechanics going so that we had good product that we could send to the customer. The next leader we had after that, he was an electronics guy. He actually came from our drives division, right? And then it was about integrating the electronics. Suddenly realized, I don't know, maybe it's more it's a drive with a compressor attached, or is it a compressor with a drive attached, right? So then we have somebody who's focusing really on the electronics and integrating that with the compressor. So we bring in somebody from the drives division who can do that. And then, we get a lot of these technical challenges solved, and Ricardo comes on as the next leader, who's much more, let's say, commercially minded. And then for Ricardo, I think, looking back, it was about getting the message out there to everybody, right? That this isn't a niche product or a one-off thing, but this is really going to be a scalable and market-ready technology. So we've kind of see what the different leaders have been doing up to now. So as you're taking the reins here, Rogerio, how do you see your path going forward? What kind of direction are you looking to take with Ricardo's retirement?
Yeah. Turbocor has become pretty much a mainstream technology. Over the last decade, Turbocor technology has been applied in several different markets and applications and have proven not to be only extremely efficient, but also reliable with very fast payback. So that's the major buy-in from customers. So once you become a mainstream, then you need to be scalable. So if you ask me what is the number one focus for us is, of course, we need to be scalable for the future. So we need to be ready to answer the significant demand from customers. We are doubling our business every 4 to 5 years. And that demand a level of investment and focus from the organization that usually you don't see on mature technologies. We need to continue investing on our production capability, our product development, our testing capability, and that demand Turbocor to attract the best people in the industry. So we are a very different company than we were 5 or 10 years ago. It's not only a question of capital investment, but mainly have the best mind to continue pushing our technology, where today people believe it is impossible, right? You have been in the company almost 30 years. I have been in the company for 30 years. I have exactly the same age as Turbocor, by the way. So 30 years in the company. And our founder has said once, right, if others can do it, so can we. And if others can't, we still have a chance, right? So that's part of our DNA. And we'll maintain our leadership position as the most innovative company in the industry and having our customer partners as an integral part of our ecosystem. So we need to be scalable because the demand of oil-free compressor is growing significantly. So it's not only as I said, the production capability. We are doubling our capacity right now in Tallahassee, and I'm pointing there because it's across the street. We are already working on how to increase further our capacity for 2026, 2027, because the market is there, the demand is there, but we need to make sure that we are growing on the right way. So we have not only a higher demand of products, but we have a higher demand in everything. Customers are demanding much more in terms of visibility, in terms of reliability, in terms of efficiency, and so on. So it's not only delivering more compressors, but we need to make sure that we are covering the entire need of our customers for the future. We have different customers than we had 20 years ago. So our goal is to continue growing on the right way and be ready for this. It's just the beginning. We believe that, as we said, by 2030, we're going to double the business again. And that's my responsibility and my, let's say, my goal in the company is to make sure that this is continue growing as we have predicted some years ago.
Thanks, Rogerio. So maybe now I take a little bit of a divergent question here and not talk specifically about the technology, but with about 90% of technology startups shutting down within 5 years of their founding, and here we sit at 30 years, what kind of lessons does Turbocor's success hold for other aspiring entrepreneurs? What kind of recommendations can we give?
Yeah, Turbocor had a very hard start since foundation. Since the beginning, Melbourne and then Montreal in Canada, it has been let's say, a fair tale for sure, right? Technology was not mature enough. Customers were not ready to adopt. Even fundings sometimes were not available. But if you ask me, I could list probably three or four major contributors for our success. I think primarily the technology itself, right? The efficiency leap, as we discussed, it was ahead of time and proven to be dramatically more efficient than any available technology. So we had the product. Then customers, as I said, the early adopters on the technology. Behind the technology, we had great entrepreneurs, customers who believed on the technology and supported Turbocor to develop the right application. Again, it was not a walk in the park. You could have the best product, but if you don't have the believers on the technology, then you won't succeed. We had and we continue having that constant feedback from the market, from our customers, on what to do. And we choose to apply the learnings as a constant improvement process. So it doesn't mean that we are just getting the feedback and say, fantastic, but we are going right and not left, right? We have chosen to move forward on this direction. So being close to customers and what we call it internally, this customer intimacy, is the key to understand their needs and work together towards a common goal. This is something that we continue doing. So the voice of customer is our what we call our oxygen to continue innovating and improving. Then it's, of course, creating the environment for innovation. Innovative companies cannot be managed on the same way as a mature business, right? So standard business case and let's say short-term side often plays against innovative companies. I think we were able, or they were able in that time, to create this environment and attract the right talents. This is now part of our DNA. We are challenging the status quo in a daily basis. And we said sometimes we are even challenging the laws of physics sometimes. So if we stop innovating, then we stop evolving. We must master our execution for sure, as we discussed it before, becoming scalable. But innovation is what will keep Turbocor as the main leader on the oil-free business. And last but not least, I think the joint venture with Danfoss was key to make it happen. If Turbocor would be acquired by any other company, it is very likely that the company will be here any longer. Senior management, mainly Jorn Clausen, was a believer that this technology was the future. But he understood that we are not yet there. Danfoss had, as I said, tough years after the joint venture and the full acquisition, but the long term was very promising. And I think that was a vision from our former chairman of the board that put us here.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note we definitely had along the way challenges and issues, right? But if you start with what's a good concept, because if you don't have a good concept, then you're not going to be in business long, right? But I agree with you. I think Danfoss allowed the joint venture to work through those failures and never said, "Oh, never mind." Right? Then it's been 3 months and we didn't hit our quarterly results, and so then it ends, right?
I think it was the right partner at the right time. We discuss a lot with some of our customers today. They were interested in this technology 20, 25 years ago, but some of them were pushing us to acquire the company because they believed that Danfoss will be the right partner for that. And I think it was the perfect match. And right timing, right company. And I think this is one of the reasons that we are here today.
Yeah. So just last question, leave it very open-ended. Was there something we didn't get out there in this conversation that you want to make sure you communicate to the audience?
I think we are able to cover everything, and I really appreciate the time. I think it's important for people to understand that Turbocor is really becoming a mainstream technology. It was a niche market some years ago. We have big companies who now believe on the technology, who are seeing the benefits of the technology. The growth that we have seen over the last year was tremendous. And our expectation for the coming years is quite promising. So we continue growing. We continue trying to find the best minds from the industry and attract to Turbocor. We continue adding production lines and testing capabilities to make sure that we can fund this growth. So hopefully we're going to be here 5 years from now, Vic, discussing again, right, celebrating our 35th anniversary, talking about the significant growth that we have seen again over the last 5 years.
Fantastic. So that's it for this episode of EnVisioneering Exchange. I'd like to thank my guest, Rogerio Federici from Danfoss Turbocor, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Vic.
Don't forget to subscribe to EnVisioneering Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Captivate, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Lastly, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate, review, and share it with your network. Thanks for listening, and talk to you next time.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the EnVisioneering Exchange podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved and not necessarily represent those of Danfoss LLC and its employees. Danfoss LLC is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the podcast series available for listening on this site. This podcast series does not constitute professional advice or services. This podcast, including Danfoss LLC and the producers, disclaim responsibility from any possible adverse effects of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and Danfoss LLC in this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility of statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute this podcast. The developers of the EnVisioneering Exchange podcast site assume no liability for any activities in connection with this podcast or for use of this podcast in connection with any other website, computer, or playing device.